Welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. My guest this broadcast is Chris Pinto. He's been with me for a few broadcasts. Chris, welcome back.
Thanks, Brandon. Good to be here as always.
Your website's noiseofthunder.com.
Yes.
And he has a daily radio show. I have a daily radio show, and you can hear both of them at Worldview Weekend Radio, or actually, I guess the website's worldviewradio.com, or just go to worldviewweekend.com, either one, worldviewweekend.com, and you can hear his daily radio show, my radio show that's each day, as well as a few others that we carry as well. Worldviewweekend.com, or you can visit his website and pick it up there at noiseofthunder.com. All right, let's talk about Benjamin Franklin. We were talking about the Founding Fathers. Let's talk about Franklin. Then I want to talk about the layout of Washington, D.C., because you, in addition to having the Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers documentary, it's 3 hours long, you have this one as well, Riddles in Stone, The Secret Architect of Washington, D.C. How long is that one?
3 hours.
3 hours as well. Wow, you give people a lot of value, don't you?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the architect in D.C. and some of the worldview symbols and signs, maybe the occultic pagan signs in the architecture as well, and then show some video clips, including a Freemasonry ceremony of the oil, the wine, and the corn at the rededication of the U.S. Capitol. I think it was 1993. You want to do all that?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's talk about one more founding father that we didn't get to in the last broadcast, and that's Benjamin Franklin. We talked about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, reasons why we believe they were very hostile to the gospel, at least Adams and Jefferson. Washington wasn't hostile to the gospel, just no evidence that he was a Christian. Another one is Franklin. Was he hostile to the gospel?
He was a lot more moderate and respectful toward Christianity, but there were some, there are some quotes from him where he says things like, that original sin was as ridiculous as imputed righteousness. And there he's clearly refuting the idea of the gospel foundation, that all have sinned. We all come into the world with a sin nature, and therefore we need to put our trust in Jesus as the Son of God so that his righteousness is imputed to us. Franklin said that's a ridiculous idea. And of course, Franklin was a Freemason, and in Freemasonry they believe that you have to perform good works and good deeds.
Earn your salvation.
Earn your salvation, basically.
Yeah. And even Time Magazine did a piece on Franklin and that he was a part of a club called the Hellfire Club?
Yeah, that's well known. The History Channel and Time Magazine have both done stories on Franklin and the Hellfire Club. We have a whole section in Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers talking about that. But this was a club over in England. They were founded by a man named Sir Francis Dashwood, who was part of the government. He was a prominent member in the government of England at the time, and that's what these guys were. They were powerful nobles in English society. And Franklin, being a prominent member in the United States, he went and he kind of joined this as another secret society. But they were known for having drunken orgies and satanic rituals, where they would often, it was said, they would mock Christianity, make fun of traditional religion, and so on. So I think publicly Franklin was a very moderate, polite, respectful sort of guy, but privately he certainly had a more mischievous side.
And we want to show a video clip here, and we want to explain part of it, because this is talked about even by his own museum over there in England. Time Magazine, I don't know if they talked about it or not. The History Channel's talked about this shocking, these burned bodies found under his house, right?
Yeah, well, it's called Benjamin Franklin House, and it was his residence in London when he was alive. And what they did was they went to converted it to a museum years ago, and as they were digging up the foundation there, they discovered all of these dead bodies buried beneath the floor.
And this has even been talked about on the History Channel?
I haven't seen it on the History Channel, but it made the London newspapers. I've read it. You can go online and read online articles. It's well documented information, and the museum there today acknowledges that these bodies were found, but they provide one explanation. Other people, however, are suspicious that maybe the Hellfire Club had something to do with it.
So we're not showing this just to be sensational. There's a reason for showing it, and that is?
That it's real information. But it's because there's a controversy.
Yeah.
Because when they were first dug up, there was suspicion as to whether or not these people had been murdered, or whether or not they were a part of this medical doctor's medical school, and that's where the bodies came from. But there are people who suspect that Franklin's involvement with the Hellfire Club may have had something to do with it.
So in other words, there may have been some kind of rituals, satanic rituals
Satanic rituals going on, absolutely. And the Hellfire Club was well known for that.
And again, this is not to be sensational. This is well known within history, you're saying. We can find this in many places, including papers right over there in Europe.
And if you go over there, if you go to the Benjamin Franklin house today, you can watch video clips online. They almost treat that side of it like it's a haunted house.
So they're kind of sensationalizing it.
Yeah, they like, create this kind of spooky atmosphere over there because they found they found the dead bodies of adults and children that were buried beneath the floor.
But it could have also then been the medical doctor who lived there, who may have been doing some things he shouldn't have been doing, and needed somewhere to dispose of the body. Right. So we really don't know.
We don't know, but even if that were the case, they say the only way because back then it was illegal for him to operate on these bodies, he would have had to become a grave robber of some kind, and go into the cemetery and dig up these bodies and bring them and then operate on them. So there's a lot of mystery and question marks there. And what we do is we just kind of
present the facts and let people decide for themselves.
Exactly.
Because we really don't know.
Yeah.
But we do know, it's a matter of fact, and Time Magazine's reported as well, that Franklin did belong to this group called the Hellfire Club. That is a group that certainly was not a Christian organization.
No, not at all. And that is provable. That's well documented.
All right, let's roll the clip.
Franklin's connection to the Hellfire Club is disturbing enough, but becomes especially dark when one considers the grisly discovery made 200 years after his death. On February 11th, 1998, the Sunday Times of London reported that workmen have dug up the remains of 10 bodies hidden beneath the former London home of Benjamin Franklin, the founding father of American independence. The remains of 4 adults and 6 children were discovered during the restoration of Franklin's home at 36 Craven Street. The Times reported that initial estimates are that the bones are about 200 years old and were buried at the time Franklin was living in the house. Most of the bones show signs of having been dissected, sawn, or cut. One skull has been drilled with several holes. The article goes on to suggest that the bodies may have been the result of the experiments of Dr. William Hewson, who was a friend of Benjamin Franklin. Hewson apparently ran his medical school for 2 years in Franklin's home. For the record, the Benjamin Franklin house officially agrees with this explanation. But there are others who still suspect the dead bodies may have been the result of human sacrifices conducted by the Hellfire Club. The Associated Content even published an article titled Ben Franklin and His Membership in the Hellfire Club, Founding Father or Satanic Killer. The original Times article reported that the bones were deeply buried, probably to hide them because grave robbing was illegal. Later reports would reveal that not only were human remains found, but animal remains as well. From the published photographs, some of the bones appear to be blackened or charred as if by fire. It is well documented that Satanists perform ritual killings of both humans and animals alike. Could Franklin and his Hellfire friends have been working with Dr. Hewson to provide him with fresh bodies?
Wow, well, that's very interesting, Ben Franklin. So there's really no evidence, again, in fact, there's evidence maybe contrary to anyone believing that Franklin was a Christian. He was openly involved in Freemasonry, even though he is attributed for quotes like, at calling it the Constitutional Convention for a time of prayer and fasting, can a nation rise without God's aid? A sparrow can't fall without him seeing it. Can a nation rise without his aid? Again, just because they use Christian terms, it doesn't mean that they were committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's really what we're saying. Let's not make people into Christian heroes that really were not Christians at all, and maybe were even hostile to biblical Christianity.
Yeah, and I mean, and Franklin himself, he was a very rakish fellow, to use a British term. in terms of being into, I mean, he led a very immoral life as a matter of habit. He spent years writing letters to a married woman, and you can read these letters online. It's obvious that he was not pursuing Christian morality in his own life, and then his involvement in this club. Even before he died, he was questioned by a friend of his about what his belief was concerning Christianity. And he openly said that while he believed Jesus had set forth the best form of morality that the world had ever seen, he simply did not, believe in Christ's divinity, did not, and believed that the Bible had certain corrupt changes to it, by which he would have meant, by implication, the miracles of Christ, the virgin birth, all the stuff that you find the Enlightenment thinkers objecting to, that he openly associated with.
Right. Let's talk about Freemasonry, because Freemasonry has been quite popular within the Founding Fathers era. A lot of them were into Freemasonry, correct?
Oh yeah, Franklin was a very well-known Mason, as was George Washington. Masonic lodges are divided. About half of them say that Thomas Jefferson was a Mason, the other half say he was not. If you go to the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library, Truman was a well-known Mason, but there in the Truman Library they list Thomas Jefferson as a Freemason.
They do.
Yeah, in that library. So then Thomas Paine, it's kind of goes back and forth. Some
and
say
by the
yes,
way, we
others
have a
no.
whole documentary on Freemasonry by Ron Carlson. He filmed it for us a few years ago. It's available on our website, worldviewweekend.com. Freemasonry and the Shriners, are they compatible with biblical Christianity? You'll find that at worldviewweekend.com inside our bookstore. Just look around at our DVDs and you'll find it. Ed Decker has written a lot on that. He was a Mason and a Mormon at one time. You've interviewed him for a lot of your documentaries on Freemasonry as well, haven't you?
Yeah, in fact, he appears in Riddles and Stone. So he does a great job.
Let's talk about Freemasonry in regards to the oil, the wine, and the corn. Let's play a video clip. This was the rededication, I think, of the U.S. Capitol in 1993. They got a man out there in his full Mason regalia, his entire Mason uniform.
Yeah, they got a lot of guys out there. They have like hundreds of Freemasons that you'll see in the clip in this big ceremony out on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol, and they're openly declaring that the U.S. Capitol was a Masonic structure.
And the guy goes on to say, we dedicated and laid the cornerstone of a lot of the buildings in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
We meaning the Masons.
Absolutely. It's very clear.
So it's kind of interesting. A lot of folks want to go to Washington, D.C. for a Christian heritage tour, but are they also turning the camera around? Because I know people do Christian heritage videos and stuff in D.C., but if you turn the camera around, you could point to just as many, if not more, things that are pagan and occultic symbols, correct?
Yeah, in fact,
I mean, that's what you get into, isn't it? In Riddles and Stones, the secret architect of Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, the Christian symbols or the biblical symbols are very sparing in Washington, D.C., and I question them simply because anything from the Bible is being seen through the lens of Freemasonry that has a completely different view of Christianity than we would as Christians.
Right. But you would have to ignore a lot of the Freemasonry and occultic symbols and Greek mythology. To produce a DVD, you would have to go out of your way to ignore some of these other symbols that are in these architectural structures, correct?
Right, and what people usually end up doing is they will just kind of Christianize the pagan symbol. Classic example, the Washington Monument is an Egyptian obelisk. That's the shape of it. That's what it was designed to be. But on top they wrote Laus Deus, glory to God. And so Christians will sometimes point to that as evidence of our Christian heritage, supposedly.
But what God? Is it the Mason God?
Exactly, that's the thing. It can only be the God of the Masons, because God in the Bible says, I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, nor my praise to carved images. So God specifically speaks against what they were called the pillars of the pagans in the Bible, and he commands his people to tear them down. Certainly not to write his name on them.
Let's go to this clip of the, what do you call him, the Grand Master of the Lodge or whatever?
Yeah, some Masonic Grand Master, and he's performing this corn, wine, and oil ceremony.
And then we'll come back and we'll show you that the corn and the wine and the oil is actually in the book of Hosea. And it was offered to Baal. And we'll tell you really how this connects back up with what the Bible says have nothing to do with. Watch this clip from the Riddles and Stone documentary by Chris Pinto.
Know all of you who hear me We proclaim ourselves free and lawful Masons, true to the laws of our country, professing to revere God and to confer benefits upon mankind.
This is the ceremony in which Senator Strom Thurmond, himself a 33rd degree Mason, took part.
Senator Thurmond, we would like you to join in this.
Since the William Morgan incident in 1826, when Americans uncovered a secret cabal working inside the government, the presence of Masonry in places of power has always sparked debate. But their influence in American government is undeniable.
This is the same Bible upon which Presidents Clinton, Bush, Carter, and George Washington were inaugurated president.
Of America's 43 presidents, at least 15 are confirmed Masons, though some say the number is even greater. In addition to the Capitol, the Freemasons have laid the cornerstone for every major building in Washington, D.C.
The cornerstones of the President's House, known to us as the White House, the Washington Monument, the Smithsonian, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, incidentally by past Grand Master Benjamin Franklin, and Constitution Hall stand out among many others as outstanding examples of cornerstones which have been laid Masonically. The cornerstone of the United States Capitol, however, stands out above all buildings erected in the free world as the seat of government for our people.
This bronze plaque, located inside the U.S. Capitol, marks the spot where the original cornerstone was laid by George Washington, the first American president and a Freemason.
George Washington is probably the most famous Mason in the world.
The George Washington Masonic Memorial is entirely dedicated to the idea of Washington as a Freemason.
Now, we do know that Washington participated in the laying of the cornerstone of the United States Capitol as a Masonic ceremony, and he wore his regalia as a Master Mason. And he laid the cornerstone and performed the ceremony of laying the cornerstone.
Washington's participation in the event was recorded by the newspaper of the time, the Columbian Mirror, which can still be obtained through the Library of Congress.
Laying the cornerstones of buildings which serve mankind is one of the world's most ancient customs.
The cornerstone laying ceremony predates Freemasonry, although its early symbolic purposes as a sacrifice to appease the gods or demons or whatever in prehistorical times, of course, has no application to why Freemasons do it. The corn, wine, and oil that we use for this are also ancient symbols.
Corn is the symbol of plenty, wine the symbol of refreshment, and oil the symbol of joy and gladness.
While Masonry maintains these symbols as a representation of blessing, there are some who believe they hold a more hidden meaning.
With symbols, there are always multiple levels, up to 7 different levels of interpretation with every particular symbol.
Corn is an important symbol in Masonry and is one found repeatedly in Washington, D.C. But what sort of hidden meaning could apply to corn? In Hebrew, the word for corn is Dagon, which became the name of a Babylonian god. Some believe this same god was adopted by the Phoenicians under the name Dagon. While Dagon was often worshipped as the fish god, he was also the god of corn. His son was known as Baal, who was often called the son of Dagon or the son of corn.
Now, corn, of course, if we're talking about pre-New World times, would be any grain or wheat.
To complicate matters further, in the Old Testament, we find the children of Israel offering corn and wine and oil to Yahweh, the God of the Bible. Yet at some point, God's anger was kindled against them, for turning the sacrifice into idolatry. In the book of Hosea, God says of Israel, "She did not know that I gave her the corn and wine and oil, which they prepared for Baal." Notice again this Phoenician version of Baal, as a bearded man with strong features. Could Baal have been the model for the bearded male images that appear throughout Washington, D.C.? Take note of this image, with ears of corn carved into the hair. According to legend, Baal was once slain by the god of death and taken into the underworld. But at some point, he was resurrected, or as it is sometimes called, awakened. At Haines Point in Washington, D.C., is found this mysterious statue of a bearded giant rising up out of the ground. Or perhaps out from his grave. The statue is called the Awakening. According to the Masonic Encyclopedia, another symbol for resurrection is the Egyptian obelisk, which is the shape of the Washington Monument. The word obelisk is sometimes translated Baal's shaft, or the shaft of Baal. As a result, critics of Masonry argue that Baal, not Yahweh, is the real God to whom Masons perform their ceremony.
It's not until you get to the Royal Arts degree that all of a sudden you realize who God is, or what the name of God is. It's hidden for a long time. In fact, you're told that there's this hidden word you're supposed to search for. But it's not until you finally get to that degree that you realize that His name is revealed.
It's believed that at the higher levels, the Masons secretly worship Baal under a hidden and unusual name.
As you go higher up in the Masonry, you learn the secret name of God, which is a secret and the lost word that the Masons in the Blue Lodge seek. They already know it. It's Jobulon. It's a combination of Jehovah, Baal, and Osiris. It's a deity that is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
It's not intended to represent a god. Its only use in the ritual is as a password to gain entry to the lodge.
It's a demonic god. It's Baal worship. That's what you're involved in.
Wow, that's excellent footage there. Let's go to Hosea chapter 2, verse 8. For she did not know that I gave her grain, wine, and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. Now, isn't it interesting? Hosea chapter 2, verse 8 speaks of giving oil, wine, and corn to Baal. They're involved in occult worship here, idol worship, correct?
Yeah, all the indications are there. In fact, we show in the film the pattern of corn, because grain appears in some of the newer Bibles, but in the King James, which would be used by the Masons, the word corn appears. And so throughout the architecture of Washington, D.C., you find husks of corn over and over again, like at the feet of Thomas Jefferson's statue there in the Jefferson Memorial, right around his feet at the base of the statue, they've got husks of corn. And they appear all over in different places in the architecture in D.C. So it seems to have a very Masonic meaning to it.
Well, and they're offering it here in Hosea chapter 2, verse 8, to the false god of Baal.
Right.
How does that relate to the oil, the wine, and the corn with the Masons? Because doesn't the name they give for God, isn't that really a combination of three gods, and one of them is Baal?
Yeah, they at the higher levels of Masonry, they talk about the secret name of God, which is Jebulon or Jobulon, and it's a combination of the names Jehovah, Baal, and then Osiris, the Egyptian god. And so they combine those three names into one, and they come up with Jobulon. And that is what they say, in this ritual as the secret name of God. And it's really this amalgamated idea of God. It's what we see in Masonry and these other secret groups where they're trying to promote many paths to God and all gods are one and the same. It's what they mean when they say the great architect of the universe.
And that's a phrase that George Washington used over and over.
Yeah, he used it repeatedly in his letters.
And so again, we see in Hosea chapter 2, verse 8, they're offering up grain, wine, and oil to Baal. And we see the Freemasons have at the higher levels this Jobalan, which is the combination of three names, one of them being Baal.
Right, and in fact, the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk, the word obelisk means the shaft of Baal. So it's another reference to Baal.
Amazing. And this is all in Riddles and Stone in Washington, D.C. And you can get it at noiseofthunder.com. Now, you have another documentary called The New Atlantis. I think it's very fascinating, where you talk about how Washington, D.C. and some of the other cities on the East Coast are lined up perfectly with Stonehenge. I mean, what is the probability that these cities would line up perfectly with these occultic sites? And I know some of it has to do with the fact that some of these New Agers believe there are channels of energy that flow around the earth, and they want to build their architecture in these channels. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it all sounds very fantastical when you first start learning about it. And you think, wow, could
conspiracy theory?
Exactly. Is it a conspiracy theory? Until you start researching how they built cities in the ancient world, in ancient Egypt and Babylon, Greece and Rome. That was just how they built cities. They looked for what were called ley lines, or lines of energy, or what they believed was spiritual energy.
So it's very New Age and occultic.
Very New Age, very occultic, but it dates back to the ancient world. And the reason for doing it was they would build cities in alignment with the stars, and then in alignment with other monuments or places that they believed were spiritually powerful, that would bring good luck or blessing or something to a town or a city that was being built. This is what the Masons would do and people involved in these occult groups. And so once you realize that, then it kind of makes sense why Freemasons in America would line up the early Revolutionary War cities, line them up with Stonehenge all the way across the Atlantic. And we show in our film, The New Atlantis, how it was that they did that and how the architecture all fits together.
I mean, what is the statistical probability that all these cities would just line up perfectly?
Well, I don't know exactly what the statistical probability would be, but it seems...
Wouldn't be very good,
Wouldn't be very good. Wouldn't be very good. It's hard for me to believe that it's a coincidence. And other researchers who look into ley lines and the energy lines that go around the globe and stuff like that, they find it very difficult to believe as well. That these monuments from the ancient world, whether it's the pyramids, Stonehenge, and other places down in South America, they've got pyramids there as well. They believe that the people who built them in alignment with the stars and in alignment with other monuments that they were aware of.
Let's talk about some of the statues. You walk through Capitol Hill. You got a chance to go through Capitol Hill and to shoot some footage. A security guard actually was aware of what you were doing and actually helped you get in, didn't he?
Yeah, there was actually a Christian guy, wonderful brother. His name was Tony, and he worked inside the U.S. Capitol. He was a police officer inside the Capitol. And he found out that we were working on the film and contacted us and said, have you guys been able to get inside any of these buildings here in Washington, D.C.? And we said, no, not yet, because we had done filming outside, in the outer architecture. But at the time, security was really tight in Washington, and they weren't really letting anybody in the buildings. And but he got us access, so we were able to get in and shoot a lot of stuff in the Library of Congress and the Capitol building. We have a lot of great footage in the film that you won't find anywhere else.
Well, give me an example. Because again, a lot of people talk about all this Christian history and heritage, but you're saying, look, we found things that are not Christian at all. They're very pagan. I
would say that the one building that is probably the least known is the Library of Congress. And if you go inside the Library of Congress, I remember when I went in there, it's almost like if you were to take the Library of Congress and sink it in the Atlantic Ocean and let it sit there for 50 years and let some plankton grow on it, scuba divers coming across it would think they had found the remains of ancient Atlantis. That's what it looks like, because you've got pagan symbols all over the place. You have zodiacs everywhere. You have all of these mythical creatures, things that have nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. And the one thing that you find that looks kind of Christian is this crucifix that's up there that has like this black double-headed phoenix behind it. And then this Rosicrucian phrase that's written up there in Latin. That's clearly evidence of the Masonic and Rosicrucian secret society element in Washington, D.C.
What about inside the U.S. Capitol? What kind of statues did you find? I'm sure they're moving them around quite often, but what did you find in there? A lot of symbols from the Church of Rome or Freemasonry?
You find some.
Or
There's a big statue of a Jesuit priest. Marquette is there. There's another one of like a Catholic monk holding a cross aloft. There's several Catholic priest statues that was kind of surprising to me. I didn't expect to find that when I was there. Then you've got the statue of Athena with her serpent, up there, standing up there with, she's like, when you're in the Senate, she's up there, and we show it in the film, she's up there with her gown, with her staff, and then there's this big serpent coiled up next to her. It's obviously a very pagan, very disturbing looking image. You find paintings of Europa riding on a bull.
Now, who would that be?
Europa, the goddess of the ancient world that they use, the European Union used Europa, riding a bull.
That was on their stamp,
right.
On some of their phone cards. I think it's actually painted in the ceiling of one of their buildings.
Right.
They've got a statue out in front of one of their other buildings. It's kind of the woman that rides the beast, really.
Exactly. That's the picture that
Which is what Revelation 17 talks about, so it's
right.
kind of odd that that's what they're using.
Yeah. They've got Neptune, they've got Hermes. I mean, they've got inside the Capitol building, they've got the apotheosis of Washington, where George Washington is floating up in the clouds, and he's not surrounded by angels, he's surrounded by all the pagan gods and goddesses. Apollo, Athena, and Mercury, and all these different gods. And so you're looking at all of this, and you're wondering how somebody like David Barton could be leading tours through the U.S. Capitol and convincing everybody that somehow or other this is all part of our Christian heritage, when it's really, it all comes out of the pagan pantheon of gods and goddesses from the ancient world.
It's a real mixture.
It's a real mixture.
I mean, you do have in the U.S. Capitol, the Rotunda, you do have them kneeling down and praying in one of the paintings.
Well, that's a painting of
yes.
the Pilgrims
yes.
on the Mayflower.
That's right.
And we would all agree that's part of our Christian heritage, certainly.
So there's a real mixture.
A real mixture. But what's strange to me about this, Brandon, is, if you read William Bradford's history of the Plymouth Plantation, they talk about how sometime after they landed, a neighboring colony erected a maypole. Okay? Just a maypole. A pole with strings on it, and people dance around like they have kids dance around it. Well, it was a pagan symbol, and they knew that. The Pilgrims knew that. Well, within a short time, they had certain men that came and cut the maypole down, forbid the people from having this maypole because they knew it was a pagan symbol. And he said it was like they were trying to revive the ceremonies of the Bacchanalia, the Bacchus worshippers, with drunkenness and this kind of thing. And so you can only imagine what the Pilgrims would say if they saw the U.S. Capitol with all this pagan stuff there. I mean, they'd be ready to burn it to the ground, probably.
Amazing. There's a lot of talk about the layout of Washington, D.C. And how Washington, D.C. is laid out. And what say you?
Well, one of probably the there's a lot of information about the street design for Washington, D.C., but probably the most controversial element is the presence of a pentagram in the street design north of the White House. And this is the one you'll see people talk about on the History Channel. You go on the internet, you see all kinds of aerial photos and maps and people drawing in the lines of the pentagram. But the controversy is over whether or not it was intentional or if it was just the accident of certain streets intersecting a certain way. And the point that critics point to is the fact that Rhode Island Avenue does not continue all the way down to complete the pentagram, but it kind of stops halfway. And when we were investigating, doing the research for Riddles in Stone, we actually discovered why that is, and that the idea of a open pentagram or a broken pentagram is really a pagan symbol, and it's a well-known symbol among Freemasons and people who are involved in the occult. And that's what we show in the film.
Well, we have a clip of that, I think. So let's show that. This from his DVD, Riddles in Stone, subtitled The Secret Architecture of Washington, D.C. You can get a copy of it at noiseofthunder.com. Let's roll this clip.
There is a pentagram that is produced by the angles of the streets and avenues to the north of the White House.
You see the goat of Mindy's appearing, the ears, the entire goat of Mindy's, and the inverted five-pointed star, which is the goat of Mindy's, built into the streets of Washington, D.C. No one could have that happen accidentally.
I've heard sillier things, but not much. No, there are no satanic plans in the street plans of Washington, D.C.
The presence of a pentagram in the street layout of Washington, D.C. is said to represent the darkest influence of Masonry in America's capital, and is the driving force behind images such as this one, which suggests that all the other buildings and monuments are of satanic origin. As many are aware, the presence of the pentagram is greatly disputed. During the Middle Ages, the pentagram was a symbol of good luck and protection when used by those who practice magic.
And one of the things they came upon was the idea that if there were such things as demons and spirits, then they should be able to summon them, either just to observe them to prove that they existed, or to control them to whatever purpose they might want to. These people were, I suggest, an early form of experimental scientists as much as they were magicians. They were just trying to see what would happen. And one of the things they decided to do is if they were going to call up a spirit or a demon in a specific place, they'd draw a circle, and then they would put pentagrams at the corners as a warding sign to protect them from whatever danger that demon might pose to them.
The inverted pentagram is seen as a highly satanic symbol. Meanwhile, placing a goat's head in the center of it is most often blamed on 19th century French occultist Eliphas Levi,
who arbitrarily decided to say that the pentagram, one point up was a positive good luck, good fortune symbol, and one point down was a negative evil symbol.
First, we must address the main issue raised by every researcher. Is there really a pentagram in the street layout of the city?
One segment of the pentagram is missing.
I started to look carefully at the maps and draw my lines, and then I find out that, hey, it's not a real five-pointed star, it doesn't have legs.
And you can draw a pentagram over some of the major streets, but the streets don't actually connect to form a pentagram.
There's absolutely no doubt that a partial pentagram appears in the street designs of Washington. You can look at a satellite photo of Washington, D.C. and see the pentagram. It seems to be symmetric around 16th Street, which is the street that runs into the White House. If you look at the earliest published maps of the District of Columbia, the design that was laid out by Pierre L'Enfant, you can see this partial pentagram. But it is just that, a partial pentagram. Rhode Island Avenue does not connect all the way through to Connecticut. I've always wondered to myself if we Masons are so all-fired powerful that we can have this satanic device put in the streets, how come we weren't smart enough or powerful enough to have it completed? But as I understand the use of the pentagram, it's the fact that it is a complete symbol that gives it its power and force. I've never heard of anything being associated with an uncompleted pentagram.
These assertions would seem to close the argument, except for the fact that the unfinished or broken pentagram is a recognized symbol in the occult. Manly P. Hall writes of the uses of the pentagram in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. He says, the pentagram is used extensively in black magic. The star may be broken at one point by not permitting the converging lines to touch. It may be inverted by having 1 point down and 2 up. When used in black magic, the pentagram is called the sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil. Of course, Hall wrote these things in the early part of the 20th century. But is there a record of a partial pentagram found during the Revolutionary era? The answer is yes. In fact, it is a record that shows up during the same time that the street design for Washington, D.C. was being laid out by Pierre L'Enfant, and is mentioned in the play Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe published the first edition of Faust in 1790, in which he mentions a partial pentagram in the dialogue between Faust and Mephistopheles, the devil whom he has conjured. Mephistopheles says, "Let me go up. I cannot go away. A little hindrance bids me stay." To which Faust replies, "The pentagram? That's in your way? You son of hell, explain to me, if that stays you, how came you in today?" To which Mephistopheles says, "Observe it closely. It is not well made. One angle on the outer side of it is just a little open, as you see." While Goethe published his first edition of Faust in 1790, it was between 1791 and 1792 that Pierre L'Enfant drew up the initial street design for Washington, D.C. This might all be seen as a mere coincidence, if not for the fact that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was not only a master mason, but also a famous member of the Bavarian Illuminati. But could Goethe's ideas of Hermetic philosophy have influenced the design for Washington, D.C.? And how might an unfinished pentagram reflect the Hermetic principle of as above, so below? Which brings us to what may be the most logical explanation for the unfinished pentagram in Washington, D.C., and one that seems to fit perfectly with the rest of the design for the city. A city which David Oveson calls a city of the stars.
I have seen it suggested that the unfinished nature of the pentagram in Washington, D.C. bears a resemblance to the unfinished pentagram design that is seen in the motion of Venus. Of course, Venus has a lot of retrograde motion because it is between us and the sun. And in relation to the other stars, Venus, of course, moves around a lot, but it in effect draws against the backdrop a nearly complete pentagram.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. What do your critics say? What is the common few things your critics say, and how do you respond to them? If I were a critic and knew all the things that they would say, what would I be saying to you right now, and how would you respond?
Well, somehow, one of the criticisms pointing out all of the pagan elements to Washington, D.C., we believe that it's evidence that the American revolutionaries, that their faith, because the things that are being manifested or shown in the architecture really are symbolic of so much of the philosophies and ideas and so on. Because if you read the writings of Adams and Jefferson and these guys, they're quoting Plato and Aristotle, they're quoting Cicero, they're quoting Voltaire and Rousseau. They're quoting all of the people who, to some extent, celebrated this pagan pantheon of philosophy. And that's what they're representing. They're representing the Greco-Roman philosophies that were embraced by the American revolutionaries. And that's what's represented there. So our critics say, well, this is not proof that the revolutionaries were not Christians, they argue, which is one of the main arguments that we make. Why would Christians erect a bunch of statues in the capital city of what's supposed to be a Christian nation when in the Bible you've got Paul telling us that these pagan gods and goddesses are really demons. And Paul says, I tell you that the sacrifice which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I would not that you have fellowship with demons. And he specifically tells us we cannot eat bread from the table of the Lord and from the table of demons. We cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. So we're warned about this. We're told to have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, rather expose them, reprove them. But some have tried to argue, they'll say, well, really the founders were just into classicism. They study the classics, and because they study the classics, that means somehow or other that all of these pagan gods and goddesses are okay.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere in the Bible do we find that kind of teaching or argument.
In fact, you know how I see that coming into the church? I don't know if you've ever thought of this before, but we see now a lot of the pagan mysticism coming into the church, the teachings of people like Catholic monk, a mystic Brother Lawrence, or a woman called Saint Teresa of Avila from the 1500s, who created and helped to really promote the idea of contemplative prayer. And at her fourth stage of contemplative prayer, she would actually be seen levitating. And she talks about at this fourth stage, you go into this trance and become one with God and become divine. And I hear a lot of people talk about how these are the classics. These are the classics. And so really it sounds very similar to what you're saying. Many within the church today are embracing some ideas, and we say that, hey, these are acceptable because these are the classics. Well, really all they're really accepting is pagan spirituality and mysticism. It's the very same thing with what you're saying. They're saying, well, the founders were following the classics. Well, what they were following were men that are promoting mysticism and pagan spirituality, which again, Ephesians 5:11 is what you quoted, have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose it. And so that's really the warning we're saying is, let's not be mixing our biblical Christianity with paganism. It's really kind of like what is going on in the Old Testament when the prophet Elijah is saying to them there, the children of Israel, if God be God, serve him. If Baal be God, serve him. But don't mix your pagan don't mix a pagan spirituality with your worship of God. Don't mix, let me say that again, don't mix pagan spirituality with your worship of God. That's really kind of what we're saying here. And I think some of that comes in when we elevate men like Adams or Jefferson or others who indeed may have been clearly, from the evidence we've been discussing over the last few programs, hostile to the gospel. We lift them up as Christians, and really what we're doing is lifting up people who are embracing mysticism, pagan spirituality, and then we try to mix it in with our Christianity and God bless America and we're flag-waving Americans, and really what you're doing is you're giving credence to men who are hostile to the gospel, who are mixing in pagan spirituality into their teachings, and now we brought that into the church through the Founding Fathers. Would that be a fair assessment?
Absolutely, I would agree, Brandon. I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how the more that, as Christians, that Christians try to justify men who were not really Christians, but they were hostile to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and as a result, they had all of these pagan beliefs and practices and so on. The more you try to justify them, and you try to justify the use of these pagan symbols and icons, you're going to end up changing what Christianity is. You're going to have to redefine the gospel, redefine what's written in the Bible, change it, alter it, deny it, but you're not going to end up with the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. That's not what you're going to have when you're done.
Yeah, and that is a great concern to us. My guest has been for several programs now, Chris Pinto. He's got the DVD Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers. It's 3 hours long. Riddles in Stone, the Secret Architect of Washington, D.C. And what are some of the other DVDs?
Oh, we've got, part one to this, Secret Mysteries of America's Beginning, the New Atlantis.
Yep.
We talked about
the
that.
The Lamp Hidden in the Dark.
A Lamp in the Dark, The Untold History of the Bible.
Yep.
Then we've got one on the symbols of the dollar bill called Eye of the Phoenix. That's another one. And then we've got one on the rather disturbing research of Alfred Kinsey called the Kinsey Syndrome.
That one is very disturbing. I have a whole chapter in my book, Grave Influence, on Alfred Kinsey, and really he believed that kids should be sexually active by age 6, and just was a complete pervert. But sadly, his worldview, his perversion, has now come into our school curriculum through things like the Sex Education Information Council that was really started by some of his colleagues, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talk about. And it's very disturbing that the higher levels of education at a university level are trying to normalize pedophilia.
Absolutely. And of course, we even have a woman at this time we're filming in 2011 sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who argued for the ACLU in 1977 to lower the age sex limit to age 12. Did you know that?
I've heard that before.
Yeah, it's absolutely documented. So you've got all those DVDs, then get them at noiseofthunder.com, and also hear your daily radio show there as well, right?
Right.
Noiseofthunder.com. What it would be, as we leave after several interviews here now, what is your overall arching goal over at noiseofthunder.com and all your documentaries? What's your overall objective, Chris?
Well, my ministry work kind of began with discernment ministry, with what God says in Ezekiel chapter 22, when he's talking about the corruption in the priesthood of ancient Jerusalem. And he says, her priests have violated my law and they profane my holy things. They put no difference between the holy and the profane. And that's what I believe God has called us to do, is to help sincere Christians, true believers, recognize the difference between the holy things of God and those things that are corrupting the gospel and corrupting the Christian faith, and encourage all of us toward a greater walk of holiness in the Lord.
Well, we sure appreciate what you do. We get a lot of emails, people thanking us for carrying your radio show.
Praise the Lord.
So I hope you guys will check it out at our website, worldviewweekend.com. You can hear my daily radio show there, as well as his, worldviewweekend.com. You also hear some other national radio broadcasts we carry right online that you can podcast or listen to right online at worldviewweekend.com. If you'd like to join our Situation Room, it's over $6,000 in resources, ebooks, audiobooks. It's my radio show since September 11th, 2007, all archived. It's mini keynote presentations from our Worldview Weekends from years gone by a lot of nationally known speakers. And you'll also find lots of DVDs. This very broadcast you can watch on demand when it fits your schedule inside the Situation Room when you're a member. And you'll find about over 100, I think now, DVDs, presentations by a lot of different people that you can watch on demand. It's basically a national television network that's available to you with radio on demand when you're a member. Over $6,000 in resources. You can join for a very nominal fee at situationroom.net. Hope you'll check it out, situationroom.net. It's not only a great resource for you, but it's one of the ways that we fund all the production and the cost of our radio show, our TV show, and our publishing. When you join our Situation Room, I think you're not only getting a great resource, but you're also helping us do what we do here at Worldview Weekend with radio, television, and publishing. Again, situationroom.net if you want to join the Situation Room. If you'd like to go through our online Worldview training class, you can take the class anytime you want, take as long as you want to take the class. But once you've completed the class, we'll send you our biblical worldview curriculum, Put Your Beliefs to the Test. It includes PowerPoint, video clips, leaders' notes, student worksheets. You do have to go through our training institute before you can become a biblical worldview weekend instructor, but we will send you the curriculum when you're done going through the course. You can take it online and find out full details at worldviewweekend.com/online training. That's worldviewweekend.com/online training. And then you also can find out about all the free Worldview Weekend rallies that we do. They're one night and they're free throughout the country at our website, worldviewweekend.com. We've also started a new feature, and I'm doing biblical worldview teaching via Skype. So if you'd like to have me speak at your church, your Christian school, your homeschool co-op, or even in your living room, go to our website, worldviewweekend.com/seminar. worldviewweekend.com/seminar. You can find out how I can actually teach a biblical worldview class for you, either one time or maybe for a couple weeks. But even if you just want to do it one evening and then have question and answer, you can do that in your church, Christian school, homeschool co-op, or in someone's living room. I actually taught a 2-hour class with questions in New Zealand a few weeks ago. A lady invited many of her Christian friends over. She hooked up her computer to her big screen television. I spoke for an hour and a half, took questions for 30 minutes in New Zealand. It was a real joy. Spoke recently on a Friday night and a Saturday morning in Appleton, Wisconsin, a church in Miami, and a church twice now in Indianapolis, Indiana. So if you're saying, we would love to have you come speak, but maybe your budget's limited, don't worry about hotel and travel and all that expense. We can actually speak to you now live, interactive, via Skype. You can check out all the details at worldviewweekend.com/seminar. Well, Chris, thanks again for being with us. Hope folks will visit your website, noiseofthunder.com.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Good to be here.
Well, that's it. I'm Brandon House for the Worldview Weekend Hour. Thanks for watching.